There's a moment that arrives without warning. One day, everything you've built simply stops. Your momentum vanishes. Your plans dissolve. The life you were hustling toward collapses into silence, and you're left standing in the wreckage, asking a question that has no easy answer. Why is this happening? Why now? It doesn't feel like pause. It feels like punishment. Like the universe looked at everything you were trying to become and said, no, not yet. Not like this. But here's what almost no one tells you. That moment, the one where everything falls apart, might be the most precisely timed event of your entire life. Across every spiritual tradition, every depth psychology framework, every honest account of transformation, the same pattern emerges. Before awakening, there is collapse. Before clarity, there is confusion. Before you can become who you truly are, everything you thought you were has to fall away. The mystics called it the dark night. The philosophers called it existential crisis, and the psychologists call it metanoia, a complete reorganization of consciousness. But the people who've lived through it just call it rock bottom. And rock bottom has a strange intelligence to it. It arrives exactly when the false self can no longer hold, when the life you were building on borrowed beliefs, inherited dreams, or sheer willpower finally runs out of fuel. The universe doesn't stop you because you failed. It stops you because you were heading somewhere that wasn't real. In this video, we'll explore a possibility that might change how you see your darkest moments. You'll realize that collapse is not breakdown, but breakthrough in disguise. That the void is not emptiness, but preparation. That when life takes everything away, it's not cruelty. It's an invitation to meet what's actually true. We're not here to offer certainty or dogma. We're here to explore the mystery of why suffering so often precedes awakening, and why the universe might stop you right before you break, to protect what's trying to be born and not to destroy you. If this kind of inquiry resonates, subscribe, and let's explore the edges of consciousness and the hidden intelligence in life's most painful moments. You've felt it before, that eerie stillness when life, without explanation, refuses to move forward. Doors close, opportunities vanish, relationships end, health falters, money stops flowing, and no matter how hard you push, nothing budges. It's tempting to interpret this as cosmic rejection, as if the universe looked at your efforts and decided you weren't worthy. But what if the opposite were true? What if the stop wasn't rejection at all, but redirection so precise, so perfectly timed, that it could only be described as intervention? In Taoism, there's a concept called Wu Wei, effortless action, or more accurately, action that flows from stillness rather than force. The Tao Te Ching teaches that the universe moves in cycles, expansion and contraction, noise and silence, growth and dormancy. To resist the pause is to fight the rhythm of existence itself. The tree doesn't panic in winter. It surrenders to the season, knowing spring will return when the time is right. Buddhism speaks of the great doubt, a crisis of faith so profound that every belief, every identity, every assumption about reality collapses. But this doubt isn't failure, it's the doorway. Zen masters say enlightenment doesn't come from answers. It comes from the willingness to sit inside the question until the question itself dissolves. Christianity calls it the dark night of the soul. St. John of the Cross described it as a spiritual purification, where God removes every consolation, every certainty, leaving the seeker in absolute darkness, not as abandonment, but as preparation. The fire that burns away everything false, so only truth remains. These traditions aren't speaking metaphorically. They're describing a lived experience, the moment when life forces you to stop pretending, when every strategy you use to control your reality stops working, when the false self, the one built on achievement, approval, or avoidance, can no longer sustain itself. And here's the paradox. We call this collapse. We call it crisis. We call it rock bottom. But what if it's actually a kind of grace? What if the universe, in its strange and relentless intelligence, stops you precisely because you were moving in a direction that would eventually break you? Think about it. How many times have you looked back at a closed door and realized it was protecting you from something you couldn't see at the time? How many losses turned out to be liberations in disguise? The job you didn't get, the relationship that ended, the plan that fell apart. At the time, it felt like death. But later, sometimes years later, you understood. You weren't being denied. You were being spared. The universe doesn't operate on human timelines. It doesn't move according to your 5-year plan or your need for certainty. It moves according to something deeper, an intelligence that knows when you're ready and when you're not, when you're aligned and when you're not, when what you're chasing is real and when it's just another way to avoid what's true. So the stop arrives, and it feels brutal. It feels like failure, but maybe it's the most loving thing that could have happened. Because sometimes the only way to save someone from shattering completely is to pause them right before the break. There's a word in ancient Greek that describes what happens when a person's entire understanding of reality collapses and rebuilds itself from the ground up. Metanoia. It's often translated as repentance, but that misses the depth. Metanoia means a fundamental shift in perception, a death and resurrection of the self. Carl Jung understood this. He believed that certain breakdowns weren't pathological at all. They were the psyche's way of imploding an identity that could no longer carry truth. The old self doesn't fade gracefully. It shatters. And in that shattering, something real has the chance to emerge. This is what rock bottom actually is. The death of a version of you that was never meant to survive. You built that self carefully. You constructed it from the beliefs handed to you by parents, culture, religion, trauma. You reinforced it with achievement, approval, control. You performed it so convincingly that even you believed it was real. Until one day, it wasn't. Until the foundations cracked and the whole structure came down. And suddenly, you don't know who you are anymore. In Advaita Vedanta, this is called ego death, the dissolution of the false sense of self. The ego isn't evil. It's just a construction. A story you tell yourself about who you are, what you need, what the world owes you. And as long as that story feels true, you keep living it. But when life contradicts the story enough times, when the identity you clung to stops working, the ego begins to collapse. This collapse is terrifying, because without the story, who are you? Without the achievements, the roles, the masks, what remains? The mystics call this the via negativa, the path of negation. You can't know what you are until you strip away everything you're not. And that stripping is violent. It feels like annihilation. Christian mystics described it as spiritual crucifixion, being nailed to the cross of your own illusions and left to die there. But here's the secret they discovered. What dies was never you. It was only ever a costume, a character, a survival mechanism that outlived its usefulness. Think of the snake shedding its skin. The process is uncomfortable, even painful. But the snake doesn't mourn the old skin. It was simply too small. The snake had outgrown it. And until the old skin is gone, the new one can't fully form. You outgrew the old self. That's why it's dying, because you evolved past the point where that identity could contain you. So the universe orchestrates the collapse. It removes the scaffolding. It takes away the distractions, the false comforts, the busyness that kept you from noticing how hollow it all felt. And in that moment, when everything false has fallen away, you're left with a question that has no answer. Who am I, really? That question is the doorway, and you can't cross it while still holding on to the person you used to be. The old self has to die first, not symbolically, actually, completely, so that what's real can finally rise. After the collapse comes the void, the silence, the emptiness that stretches out in every direction with no horizon, no map, no promise of when it will end. This is the part no one prepares you for, the in-between, the space where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. You're suspended in formlessness, and every instinct screams at you to do something, fix something, become something again. But the universe asks you to wait. In Buddhism, this void is called sunyata, emptiness. Not emptiness as lack, but emptiness as potential, the open space before creation. Zen students sometimes fall into what teachers call the pit of the void. where they encounter the raw experience of no self, no ground, no thing. It's disorienting, frightening, but it's also the doorway to awakening, because in that emptiness, all the false structures dissolve, and what remains is simply what is. The mystics knew this. They spoke of divine silence, the pregnant pause where God withdraws all consolation, all certainty, leaving only naked presence. St. John of the Cross wrote that in this darkness, the soul is being purified like a log in fire. The log resists. It smokes and cracks and seems to be destroyed. But what's actually happening is transformation. The wood is becoming flame. This stillness isn't punishment, it's alchemy. Think of the earth in winter. Nothing grows. The fields lie fallow. To the untrained eye, it looks like death. But beneath the surface, something essential is happening. The soil is regenerating. Nutrients are being restored. The land is preparing for the explosion of life that will come in spring. Without winter, there would be no spring. Without rest, there would be no renewal. Your nervous system understands this, even when your mind doesn't. Trauma researchers have discovered that after overwhelming stress, the body sometimes initiates a complete shutdown, a protective freeze response. It's the nervous system's way of saying, we need to stop and recalibrate before we can move forward safely. The pause is biological intelligence at work. The same is true on a spiritual level. The void is not wasted time. It's sacred time. The chrysalis doesn't look like transformation. It looks like stasis. But inside, cells are dissolving and reorganizing into an entirely new form. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly by trying harder. It becomes a butterfly by surrendering completely to the process of dissolution. That's what the stillness asks of you. Not effort, not strategy, not figuring it out. Just presence, just waiting. Just trust that something deeper than your conscious mind is orchestrating this pause for a reason you can't yet see. You're not stuck. The universe hasn't forgotten you. It's protecting you, holding you in the dark, in the quiet, in the formless space where the new self is slowly taking shape. And when the time is right, not when you demand it, but when you're actually ready, the stillness will break open, and what emerges will be unrecognizable from what fell apart. But first, you have to stop fighting the void. You have to let it hold you, because the void isn't the end of your story, it's the womb. Grace doesn't always arrive dressed in light. Sometimes it shows up as loss, as exhaustion, as the sudden, inexplicable closing of every door you are desperately trying to open. We expect grace to feel like relief, like answered prayers and open roads. But the deeper truth, the one mystics whisper and survivors know, is that grace often arrives as disruption, as the ending you didn't ask for, as the stripping away of everything you thought you needed to survive. Because the universe doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what your soul needs. And sometimes, what your soul needs is to have everything taken away so you can finally see what was real all along. This is the paradox at the heart of all spiritual awakening. Divine love doesn't always look like comfort. Sometimes it looks like devastation. The Sufis understood this. They spoke of the beloved as both tender and ruthless, destroying the false self with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. The pain is real, but so is the healing. In non-dual traditions, there's a recognition that reality doesn't oppose you. It doesn't punish or reward. It simply responds to what's true and what's not. When you're aligned with truth, life flows. When you're building on illusion, life eventually dismantles it. Not out of cruelty, but out of an intelligence so vast, so impersonal, that it refuses to let you suffer inside a lie forever. So the collapse comes, and it feels like betrayal, like abandonment, like proof that you were never meant to have what you wanted. But what if it's the opposite? What if the universe loved you enough to stop you from chasing something that would have hollowed you out from the inside? Think about the prayers you've screamed into the void, the ones that went unanswered, the relationship you begged to save, the opportunity you were certain you needed, the life you were convinced would make you whole. And then think about what happened instead. The relationship ended. The opportunity disappeared. The life you wanted dissolved into nothing. At the time, it felt like abandonment, but years later, sometimes decades later, you looked back and realized That unanswered prayer was the most generous thing that could have happened, because the thing you wanted would have kept you small. It would have kept you safe, comfortable, and completely disconnected from who you actually are. Grace doesn't let you stay comfortable in the wrong life. It loves you too much for that. The universe will take away your distractions. It will remove the relationships that were based on performance rather than presence. It will close the doors that lead to more suffering disguised as success. And it will do all of this without your permission, without explanation, without apology. Because grace isn't interested in making you happy. It's interested in making you whole. This is why rock bottom feels like mercy in retrospect. In the moment, it's unbearable. But later, when you've crossed the threshold, when you've met the self that was waiting on the other side, you realize the collapse was the kindest thing that could have happened. It was the universe saying, I will not let you break. I will break the illusion instead. So when everything falls apart, when life stops cooperating, when grace arrives disguised as ruin, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, what if this isn't happening to me? What if this is happening for me? What if the universe is removing everything false, so only truth can remain? That's not optimism. That's recognition. That's seeing the hidden hand of grace in the destruction. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. And then, quietly, something shifts. You don't notice it at first. There's no dramatic moment, no lightning bolt of clarity, just a subtle change in the quality of your presence, a breath that feels deeper, a thought that feels clearer, a stillness that no longer terrifies you. The void begins to speak, not in words, but in knowing, in intuition that rises without effort, in a sense of direction that doesn't come from planning or forcing, but from alignment with something you can't name but can finally feel. This is the rebirth, and it's nothing like you imagined. You thought awakening would be loud, triumphant, a return to strength, to clarity, to control, but it's quieter than that, softer. It's not about becoming powerful again. It's about becoming real. In Christianity, resurrection follows crucifixion as inevitable consequence. Death was never the end. It was the passage. And what rises isn't the same as what died. It's transfigured, resurrected into a form that no longer fears endings, because it knows deeply that nothing true can ever be destroyed. You were never broken. That's the revelation. You were being emptied so you could be filled with something real. The collapse wasn't failure. It was preparation. The void wasn't absence. It was gestation. And now, slowly, carefully, the new self is emerging. But here's what makes this rebirth so disorienting. You don't recognize yourself anymore. The things that used to matter, validation, status, security, feel hollow now. The fears that used to control you have loosened their grip. The life you were chasing before the collapse? You can't even remember why you wanted it, because you've touched something the old self never knew existed. You've felt the ground beneath the ground, the silence beneath the noise, the presence beneath the persona. And once you've felt that, you can't go back to pretending. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of being born again. You are not the same person who entered the collapse. That person dissolved. And what's standing here now is something the universe has been preparing your entire life. You move differently now, slower, more intentional. Not because you're afraid, but because you're finally listening to your body, to your intuition, to the quiet intelligence that knows when to move and when to wait. You speak differently, not to perform or convince, but to express what's true. And if the truth isn't welcome, you no longer contort yourself to make it fit. You've learned that authenticity is worth more than approval. You love differently, not from need, but from overflow, not to fill a void, but to share a fullness that doesn't depend on anyone else. You've discovered that the source of love was never outside you. It was buried beneath the rubble of the false self, waiting to be unearthed. So here's what remains when everything else falls away. The recognition that your collapse was never random. It was timed, orchestrated, a precise intervention by a universe that refused to let you shatter completely. Rock bottom wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of the true one, the one where you stop performing and start being, where you stop chasing and start listening, where you finally understand that the pause wasn't punishment, it was protection. The universe didn't stop you because you failed. It stopped you because you were ready to let go of the false self, ready to sit in the void, ready to be remade into something that no longer needs to prove, perform, or pretend. And maybe that's the deepest mystery of all, that grace sometimes arrives as devastation, that love sometimes looks like loss, that the universe breaks the illusion before it breaks you. So if you're standing in the ruins right now, if everything you built has collapsed and you can't see the way forward, know this: you're not abandoned, you're not forgotten, you're being held in the most sacred pause of your entire life, the pause before awakening, the stillness before rebirth. The universe stopped you because it saw something you couldn't. It saw that you were heading toward a life that would slowly hollow you out, and it loved you enough to intervene. Trust the collapse. Trust the void. Trust that what's emerging from the ashes is worth everything you had to lose to find it. If this stirred something in you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.